The Cartier tank is a classic watch worn by legends like Andy Warhol, Muhammad Ali, Jackie Kennedy, and Fred Astaire. But do you know which Cartier model is the top seller on Chrono 24? It's not the tank, it's the Cartier Santos. It's one of my favorite watches of all time, and today we're covering everything you need to know if you're thinking about buying a Cartier Santos. We'll dive into the model's 120-year history. We'll talk about how the watch has changed with each era. We'll hit the variety of Santos watches available to you on the market. We'll cover how the watch holds up to the elements and to scratches. And of course, we'll compare the Santos against its stiffest competition to see who comes out on top. And yes, I did dress extra French for this Cartier video. You may be surprised to learn that the Cartier Santos is the first men's wristwatch. That's right, up until then, men wore their watches in their pockets. Wristwatches were more of a ladies' thing at the time, and thankfully, we've come a long way since then. And that's not the only first for the Santos. It may not look like it, but it was also the world's first pilot's watch. Take that, IWC. The Santos was designed by Cartier for the Brazilian aviator Alberto Santos Dumont in 1904, who complained to his friend Louis Cartier about how impractical it was to read a pocket watch while flying. The Santos' shape was apparently inspired by a square pocket watch that Cartier had developed, and the screws on the bezel were reminiscent of the exposed screws on the Eiffel Tower, which was built about 15 years prior. In 1911, Cartier put the Santos Dumont, as it was known, into full production. The watches were available in either platinum or yellow gold and used movements by Jaeger. They measure 25 millimeters wide by 35 millimeters lug to lug, and they feature deployant buckles, which is another first for the Santos. So it's the first men's wristwatch, the first pilot's watch, and the first watch with a deployant buckle. Not bad, right? When the 1970s rolled around, the big thing in mechanical watches was sport luxury. We see this most prominently with the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak in 1972 and the Patek Philippe Nautilus in 1976. So in 1978, Cartier renamed and revised their Santos de Cartier to include an integrated bracelet made of steel. This is the first time that the jewelry and watch maison had worked with steel instead of precious metals. They of course also made full yellow gold and two-tone versions. Think Gordon Gekko and the 1980s hit movie Wall Street. The Santos was reinvented again in 1987 as the Santos Galbet. Galbet means curved in French, and the Santos now had a curvier case, smoothing out the corners and wrapping around the wrist more organically. The Santos Galbet XL came along in 2005 during the big watch craze of the early 2000s. It's important to note, however, that the Santos Galbet XL measures 32 millimeters wide by 45 millimeters lug to lug. So it's extra large compared to the Santos watches that preceded it, but on the wrist it wears like a 36 millimeter Rolex Datejust. Cartier launched the exclusive CP collection in 1998, which stands for Collection Privée Cartier Paris. These were historical Cartier models with precious metal cases and movements from high-end manufacturers like Frederic Piguet. These watches are highly sought after by collectors, and especially now that Cartier has been the most popular they've ever been. Things changed in 2004 with the 100-year anniversary of the Santos. That's when we get the Santos 100, the military Humvee of Cartier watches. We said a minute ago that the Cartier Santos Galbet was developed in response to consumers' demand for big watches at the time. The Santos 100 from that same period is an even better example of that. For reference, the Santos 100 Large measures approximately 41 millimeters wide by 51 millimeters lug to lug. This is also a time when we see Cartier experimenting with black PVD cases, titanium cases, skeletonized dials, chronographs, and in-house movements. Fast forward to 2018, and we see the contemporary version of the Santos featuring more sensual case lines, more manageable case sizes, and innovations like the quick switch strap changing system and the smart link system that allows you to easily adjust the bracelet size on your own. 1 year later, we see the debut of the dressier Santos Dumont line inspired by those very early Santos models. Today, Cartier continues to expand the Santos and Santos Dumont collections into more materials, more dial colors, more dial styles, and more complications. Before we move on, I'd like to thank Tony Trena, founder of the Restatement newsletter, for compiling the deep dive on the Santos' history and evolution. It was a big help for this video, so thanks, Tony. If you go on Chrono 24 right now and type in Cartier Santos, about 4,000 watches will show up. And the range includes the many eras and the evolution of the Santos that we just covered. So here's a quick guide to some notable models to be aware of on your hunt, including the best daily wear options, the most collectible versions, the best for dressing up, and the all-around sexiest Santos. Let's go. For the best everyday Cartier Santos, try the Galbay Excel reference 2823. It's an automatic with a date window tucked discreetly between 4 and 5 o'clock. On the wrist, the watch wears a lot like a 36mm Datejust. The only issue with this watch is that there isn't a lot of water resistance. So if you prefer, go for the current generation Santos. The proportions are a little bit different from the Galbay, but that 100 meters of water resistance and the screw-down crown are welcome additions. And the color dials also feature luminescent hands and hour markers, so you could do pretty much anything in the modern Santos. For the best classic dress watch version of the Santos, we are of course going with the Santos Dumont. It's an undeniably good-looking watch, period. They are most often using quartz movements, which is an understandable turnoff, but it's thin, it's more affordable, and there's no seconds hand to give away the fact that it's a quartz watch. For the most collectible Cartier Santos, you have a few options. The CP collection is full of hits, so we must include those. Key among these is the 1913 limited edition, which draws inspiration from the earliest Santos watches. The Ghost Dial, and to a lesser extent, the Burgundy Dial Santos watches are having a moment. I recently sold my octagonal Santos with a tropical Ghost Dial, and let me tell you, it is a mesmerizing watch if you don't need to know the time. Finally, the sauciest, sexiest Santos on the market is the tall, dark, and handsome black lacquer Santos, which debuted in 2022. There's just something handsome and a little deviant about this watch. I'm going to touch quickly on durability and reliability, because if you're going to buy a watch, you should wear it. And if you wear your watch, there's always the chance that things might happen to it, that life might happen to it. And since the Santos is a sport watch, but also not always, it's helpful to know how they hold up over time. In terms of water resistance, it's a pretty recent addition to the Santos. If that's a necessary factor for you, then stick to the current generation with 100 meters of water resistance and that screw-down crown. But if you're not submerging your wrists on a frequent basis, then really any Santos from the last few decades would be suitable for daily wear. When it comes to scratch resistance, things get a little trickier. After all, what attracts scratches the most? It's flat, polished surfaces. And what is the Santos bezel made of? You can do a Google search for Cartier Santos scratches for some visual examples. And I think the takeaway here is that the first cut is the deepest. After repeated wear, the individual little scratches become less noticeable. In fact, they really only show up in bright, direct light. So if you're in the office or out to dinner or you're outside on a cloudy day, you're not going to see or notice the small scuffs. There's something to be said about a watch in honest condition, and hey, if you want to, you can always have the bezel of the bracelet professionally polished. Let's wrap this up by talking about the biggest competition for the Cartier Santos. And here I see two main competitors. Number one is the Rolex Datejust. There's a great Fratello article comparing these two watches, and there are a few factors that might push you towards one or the other. You have differences in the case shapes, of course, and the Datejust offers more variety of dials over the years. The Datejust has a better movement than the Santos, so the Santos may win on sheer design, but the Datejust is better in terms of performance and reliability. Same but different, you may consider the Omega Seamaster Aquaterra. The Aquaterra captures that blend of dress and sport, and you have a range of colors and sizes to choose from. And because it's part of the Seamaster line, water resistance is not an issue. The Aquaterra looks great on a bracelet and on a strap, so there's that versatility there. Now there are some tertiary options you could consider. The 38mm Breitling Super Ocean Heritage comes to mind, or maybe the Super Ocean Heritage 57. Tudor's Black Bay 36 kind of fits in here. So does the Breguet Marine for a similar dressy but sporty package. You could make an argument for the JLC Polaris, or even the Longines Legend Diver, but really I think it comes back to the Santos versus the Datejust versus the Aquaterra. So how should you choose between these? Well, chances are you already know which way you're leaning. You could go spec for spec if you need something really dependable, or you could decide based mainly on the brand name and the vibe. That's totally fine. This is one of these examples where your gut is smarter than your brain.